All right, everyone, it's time to discuss our old favorite governor, Phil Scott of the state of Vermont, yet again. In the same context, we've discussed him several times before, being a mentally crippled sellout on the issue of gun rights. Vermont, for context, had no meaningful gun control until very recently. Just happens to coincide with a Republican administration, showing you, again, a Republican in Vermont tends to be more like a Mitt Romney. A Cornine, someone like that, Lindsey Graham. Not necessarily, you don't get a lot of like the moral traditionalist Republicans, which can be helpful because there's not a lot of religiosity in the state of Vermont. You also, though, you don't really get as many populistic Republicans. I realize in Vermont I'm in a tiny minority. I'd more fit in with the politics of New Hampshire, certainly, the twin of Vermont, than I do with Vermont at this point, which is sad. And I grew up and lived most of my life there. Other than brief stints in Texas and Florida and now a few years in the Netherlands, I consider myself to be genuinely a Vermonter. Although technically I was born in New Hampshire and was there for the first day of my life, so hey, if I move to the Granite State, they can't stop me. Ha ha ha, you have to accept me as one of you. I'm like G.G. Allen, also born in New Hampshire, by the way. I'm glad about this. I'm in good company. Anyway, and then Joseph Smith was born in Vermont. There's a little bit of a difference between our two. It's something in the water. The Connecticut River splits it up, and one side it's a little sweeter than the other, I suppose. Maybe some more lead in the water, I suppose. Anyway, Phil Scott, when he first got elected, Vermont having no meaningful gun control since inception, our state constitution effectively hyper-reiterates the Second Amendment. The only thing that Vermont had on the books ever prior to Phil Scott was a suppressor ban. And that was overturned recently. For a couple of years, there was zero gun control in the state of Vermont. It did not fundamentally exist. Despite this, we have low gun crime rate. We've never, as far as I know, I don't think we've had a mass shooting in the state of Vermont. Let's hope that continues. And yet Phil Scott looked at the news and he said, I want to screw the Vermonters out of their weapons because I get nervous about these hunters and shit. I get nervous about all the FUDs with their orange hats and their duck hunting gear. So Phil Scott was having a funny moment. He was having a spell, and he decided to propose exactly the same gun control that he had run against in the form of Bloomberg's authored Sue Minter crap in his first election a couple years later. The second there was a school shooting that hit the national news media and it had nothing to do with Vermont, he proposed the same fucking plethora of gun control, just minus the assault weapon ban. So, yeah, wonderful. And by the way, why has nobody in the state of Vermont challenged this under the auspices of Bruin? Why has nobody in the state of Vermont dovetailed that with the subjugation of the states to the Second Amendment to work around the Vermont State Supreme Court decision upholding Phil Scott's anti-gun bullshit? I don't know. I guess nobody in Vermont had, because of the tax rate, nobody has the money to challenge it that would want to challenge it or something like that. It's bullshit. You can go over to New Hampshire and you can get a 50-round drum. In Vermont, you're limited to 10 shots in the locker. That's not really meaningful. It's also ill-enforced. Do you really think that the state of Vermont has the resources to go after Elmer for getting a 20-round mag for his M14 over there in New Hampshire? Or I think even in New York, actually? No, so whatever. Now he's got more anti-gunnery on his mind. And it's specifically and explicitly a personally targeted attack, too. It has to do with Slate Ridge. Slate Ridge was the gun training camp where people got together and they trained with firearms. And they had had complaints for years. Neighbors complained about the noise. They complained about certain not happy interactions with their Slate Ridge going neighbors. They were tired of it. Now, the state government could not go after them on any charges with relation to their interactions with others. They never had the evidence. They couldn't go after them for merely training with firearms because that's legal. They're on their own property, and noise complaint my ass. Again, if there's 3 acres of woods in between you and what the neighbor's doing, they're not hearing a lot. Okay, they hear an echoing shot in the distance. It's not loud. It's about as loud as a bird tweeting. It's not causing them any problems. So what did the state government do to get rid of Slate Ridge? They went after them on eco charges. They used the environmental court as a bypass to the fact that everything they were doing there was legal. They argued that the little shit sheds that they had built out there in order to train, because they're trying to train indoor-outdoor, you're going through the streets and avoiding sniper fire and shit, you need that sort of setup, sort of like a paintball range or something. But they didn't have the permits to build them. even though most of them were not technically standing structures, but they sued them anyway and said, look, if you don't take them down and dismantle this camp, you're up shit creek without the paddle, because over 100,000 in total fines could be levied, you could face years in jail, etc. Now, they're trying to prevent Slate Ridge. Again, this is specifically about one training camp. This is the only reason for S3, this bill that Phil Scott just signed. The bill prevents training camps from existing at all, effectively, and in the language, it's specifically if the training is for the purposes of convincing more than one person to gather together for something that would already be criminal, for some violent act, like they're going to shoot up a mall or something, or to intimidate or harass people in a civic or violent manner. Now, that's not what Slate Ridge was, but it's being explicitly mentioned that that's exactly what the state government is trying to preemptively avoid. It's things like Slate Ridge. How was Slate Ridge set up to... It was a paramilitary training camp, but I never saw them passing out brochures or getting charged by the state for doing so that contained credible threats of terroristic acts or anything like that. They never attacked their neighbors. They never apparently spoke about wanting to. That's why they were sued in the environmental court. They were sued over civil charges in an environmental court. Not over gun charges, not over terroristic threats, not over harassment, not over intimidation. Environmental Justice Court. That's how they got rid of them. Anyway, this is bullshit. It's clearly an attack solely on Slate Ridge. It doesn't even really have anything to do with Slate Ridge, but the whole point is that they don't want people to be able to train now with firearms in the state of Vermont in an organized manner. So, I mean, if you want to plink on your own property, that's fine. That's not what they have a problem with. You get together with one of your buddies and plink, all of a sudden, well, maybe it's a problem. Oh, you were taking pot shots at the side of the woodshed. Well, that's a structure, and you're more than one person, and you're having a Bud Light together because you're part of the LGBT shooting alliance, and so you're a paramilitary camp now. Well, that's illegal. We're fining you. It's a naked power grab, and it's blatantly unconstitutional. Again. At this point, the state is literally engaged in a harassment campaign against the people at Slate Ridge more than anything else. This is the only example that they're giving of such a camp. Well, there's only one there. It's quite clear who you're targeting with the law, and that's because the people at Slate Ridge got enough national attention to bring heat upon the Vermont state government, so now they're punishing them. This is a harassment campaign by Phil Scott and his administration, as well as by the leftoids in the state of Vermont. That's all that it is. It should be challenged under Bruin the same as all other existing gun control in Vermont at the state level. That's about all. Peace out.